This is the Solid Signal Podcast for the week of November 26, 2018. And this is podcast number 301. Woohoo! Okay, folks, so what happened was I'd really kind of had this idea that I was going to do this big retrospective podcast for number 300 because 300 is a pretty important number. It's not as cool as 500 or 1,000, but it's pretty good. And then I totally forgot about it. And I didn't realize until after I'd recorded it that it was podcast number 300, and meantime I had some good content, and I really didn't want to go back and do it. So, yay, it's podcast number 301. So this is going to be the one where we talk a little bit about where we've come from, where we're going to, and I thank you, of course, for being there on the ride with me. The Solid Signal Podcast was something that I started when I had only been doing the Solid Signal blog for a fairly short period of time, about a year. And I thought, okay, well, here's a kind of a way to layer on some value. And, well, initially I had two thoughts. First of all, was that every podcast that I had ever seen, every tech podcast, had been around for years, and they were on podcast number 600 something and whatever. And the second one was that I read all these articles about how podcasts were dead and how nobody was actually listening to them. And so I said to myself, well, it makes absolutely no sense to start a podcast at this point, but I may as well do it. And the great thing was that I figured, okay, if I did it and they were incredibly bad, then no one would really know because podcasts were really kind of unpopular and nobody listened to them. Well, here we are about 6 years later, and podcasts are hotter than ever, and now I'm the guy who's up to podcast number 301. And even though the nature of podcasts has kind of changed, I'm still out there, I'm still doing it, and while I'll admit this will never be one of the top podcasts in the world, it has gotten more listens than I really expected. I thought it would be, 50, 60 people on an average week or something like that. But as near as I can tell from all the different aggregators that I'm on now and all the different locations and ways you can visit, it's about, 3,000, 4,000 people are going to hit a podcast in a week, which is really kind of neat. It's nice to think that there are that many people out there who are willing to take a few minutes to listen to what I have to say. And it's kind of humbling, and I'm very grateful to all of you who do that. Anyway, the first podcast was not very good, and you can go back and listen to it. I think I'll put a link to it at the Solid Signal blog, and you can go back and listen to it for yourself. Eventually it got better. I got a little less shy, and the first podcast, almost all of them actually, until about the last 100 or so, were under 5 minutes, and I felt like 5 minutes was an insane amount of time to spend just kind of talking, and I don't really script these things ahead of time. I have some outlines and stuff, which you can probably tell when you listen to it, but 5 minutes was a tough amount of time to spend talking about a particular topic, and now it seems like it's pretty hard to keep them under 10 minutes, and I do try to keep them relatively short because I don't think that I would get as many listens if they were a 45-minute or an hour-long podcast. Meantime, I've kind of started wondering why people do listen to podcasts. Why have they become so popular? And really, podcasts are now more popular among millennials who didn't really catch the first wave of podcasts. The first wave of podcasts were more, I think, informational in nature. And today's podcasts, while some are still kind of tutorial stuff like what I do, some are editorial and news oriented, but a lot of them are actually just stories, and it's a different way of producing stories. It goes back to the old radio plays, if you think about it. It's a great way to get some entertainment in your car, especially without commercials. And that's, I think, the reason that podcasts have become popular again. With the rise of internet radio and data plans, there's an option out there for people who really want to listen to something that just isn't annoying. I have to say, folks, just in my lifetime, radio has gone from being fun to being incredibly, incredibly annoying. I listen to the radio on the way to work, like many of you do, and I hear 10 commercials in a row, 6-7 minutes or whatever, which is a long time. I mean, that can be a quarter of your entire commute, or in some cases half if you happen to hit 2 breaks during your commute time, just spent on commercials. Add into that stuff like traffic reports for places that you don't go and you don't care about because you're using Waze anyway, so you don't trust what they have to say on the radio. And it really seems like radio is kind of a waste of time and you're not getting that stuff that you really want. I think number two is that in a lot of ways, because music has become a lot more personal, it's hard for radio to keep up and play songs that people actually like. I think that 30, 40 years ago, that radio was a lot more genre-oriented. I mean, there were still like 4 or 5 different really mainstream genres and probably 10 genres that were not as mainstream. But today, I mean, there are so many different kinds of music, and that's a good thing. But finding an actual radio station that plays what you want, that's not going to work. Oh, sure, you can do that with Spotify or Slacker or whatever, but those services, unless you pay for them, they have commercials too. So if you really want to be entertained on your way to work, you want to listen to something for 30, 40 minutes that has a nice plot, has something that's interesting and engaging, and you're going to choose a podcast. I would also recommend for those of you who like long-form podcasts that you go out and listen to old radio shows because they're just as good for exactly the same reason. Yeah, some of them still have commercials built into them, but they're fun because the products have long since gone and the breaks are a lot shorter. But that's kind of my thinking about podcasts. Most of the time, I do a tutorial-oriented podcast. Sometimes I go off the rails and I get kind of angry about stuff, and I think those are actually the podcasts that people listen to most of all. But if I did that every week, well, that would really kind of belie the purpose of the Solid Signal podcast. You know, the Solid Signal podcast and its partner, the Solid Signal blog, are out there thanks to the help of Signal Group LLC, my bosses, the people who pay my bills. And the goal is to try to provide sort of a partner service to solidsignal.com, which is a great e-commerce site if you haven't been there. I suspect most of you have at this point. Solidsignal.com is a great source for the kind of consumer and professional electronics you will not find on Amazon, and the kind of professional service and support that you absolutely will not find there, since it's practically impossible to get any support at all from Amazon. And so I do try to drive traffic back there because that's my goal in life. That's my mission. That's why I'm here. But at the same time, I recognize that you all want to be entertained. Who doesn't? And I hope that I provide a good balance of entertainment and fun and tutorials and occasionally getting incredibly cranky. Today, I'm not incredibly cranky. I'm incredibly happy and grateful to each and every one of you who has listened to the Solid Signal podcast over the years. Let's hope that I'm here for another 301 podcasts. Let's hope I'm here for another 601 podcasts. That would be kind of cool. And by then, who knows what kind of stuff I'll be talking about, because the future is always in motion, and I will be here with you to experience it. That's about it for me for this week. Next week, we'll be back with some tutorial content and regularly scheduled stuff. And in the meantime, enjoy your week. Have a great one. And I will talk to you again real soon.